All right, 5 more seconds. All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. So great to see so many groups joining us, both live on camera, as well as starting to join us live via YouTube. So in these challenging times, it's awesome to still be able to do these events, only to broadcast them now into the homes of parents, educators, and students across North America. So we have a really awesome event today. I'm really excited. For today's event, we're heading up to Alaska to hang out with Doug Gualtieri. So Doug is going to take us on a little virtual field trip today and show off some of the natural wonders of Svalbard. He is a naturalist with Lindblad Expeditions, but his passion for the natural world started at an early age in his home state of Michigan. He's got biology degrees from Central Michigan University and a master's degree in conservation. So he worked as a naturalist at Denali National Park for several years. He lives in a town of about 800 residents, so he is very comfortable living and exploring in the far north. Doug, it is so great to have you joining us live today. We have such a great group of students tuning in with us. I know they're going to have tons of questions, and we are excited to take a little virtual field trip today because most of us have not seen much outside of our living rooms and kitchens and bedrooms for the last little while.
Well, it's great to be here, Joe, and thank you. I should, as a caveat, amend that biography that you read is now going on almost 20 years old, and our town that I live in here in Alaska has grown to probably a little over 1,000 people since then. I've gotten married. I have a beautiful life here with my wife in Talkeetna, and I work primarily now for Lindblad Expeditions on our ships all over the world. And it's really an honor to be here today and to see, I see many faces and I see a lot of names out there. So welcome you joining in. It's great to have you here in our living room / office here in Alaska. And I'm really, really thrilled to be able to take you guys virtually to some extent to one of the amazing places that I'm fortunate enough to work in, and that's Svalbard up in Arctic Norway. And Joe, when you're ready, I can start the actual presentation whenever.
Yeah, Doug, absolutely. Let's go for it.
Okay, let me load it up here. All right, is that looking good there on your end, Joe?
Good to go, nice and full screen.
Okay, well, I've lost most everybody in the window. I'm gonna close down my video window so I can see the slides as well. If Joe, just chime in if you need me to stop or something. Okay, so everybody, Svalbard is an island archipelago way high up in the Arctic, and many of you may have only heard of Svalbard and thought of it as an imaginary place from this wonderful story series and production, The Golden Compass. And I won't be talking about Jorik Bjørnson and his companion Lyra at all, other than I will be talking about polar bears. But so that is a real place. Svalbard is a real place, and it's a fascinating environment to be able to explore and share with people. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the landscapes of Svalbard and the absolute magnificent beauty that can be found in the Arctic as a whole. So here's just a few images of some of the land and icescapes in Svalbard before I start talking specifically about Svalbard, just to give you an idea of where we're going. It is a really remote location. It has, there's 4 main islands that make up the archipelago itself, with many fjords, bays, and inlets, and a varying degree of landscapes and just absolutely stunning, spectacular scenery, surrounded by some of the richest wildlife in the Northern Hemisphere. So just a couple looks at some of the scenery here. I think people, when they think of the Arctic and they think of beautiful places and remote locations, Svalbard in and of itself doesn't necessarily pop into their heads first, because it is a really little known area unless you started doing research on where to see polar bears in the wild, perhaps. But the landscapes here, if there weren't polar bears or any wildlife in Svalbard at all, it would be an absolutely incredible place. It's very similar. Well, I've never been to another planet, you know, technically, but there's two places in the world where you could feel the most like you're on another planet, and that's Antarctica and up in the high Arctic, both in Svalbard, Canada, Russia, and Alaska. So just to give you a little sense of where we are, that is the Arctic Circle. Some of you may be aware of what that significance is. It's nothing other than marking a place on the planet at 66.5 degrees north latitude, which is matching the difference of the tilt of the Earth's axis relative to the sun is 23.5 degrees. And at the Arctic Circle, you start to see phenomenon during, we call it the midnight sun in the summertime, where the sun doesn't set for many weeks when you're above the Arctic Circle. And in the winter time, it's the reverse. The sun never rises for many weeks when you're above the Arctic Circle. That little star down there, that's where I'm at in Alaska. So just south of the Arctic Circle, we're in the subarctic, sort of northern temperate region of North America. We have a little bit of everything going on here. As I mentioned, the Arctic Circle is at 66.5 degrees north latitude. And that is, again, only significant relative to maybe where you live. If you live down somewhere in the lower 48, Arizona or Michigan or Ohio or whatever, 66 degrees north latitude is where it gets quite cold in the wintertime. And in the summertime, the sun never sets. And that little red circle, that is the archipelago of Svalbard, and it belongs to Norway. Let's get a little closer look at it. You can see there is Europe, Russia, Europe, and Scandinavia primarily off the northern end of Europe there, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. And then there's Greenland, the big ice cap covered island of Greenland. And then Svalbard lies in between there, very high up in the Arctic. That's a satellite composite imagery of the islands itself. Here's another view, what it might look like sort of now as winter is ending, coming out of winter. There's lots of ice still in the fjords and bays, and sea ice is starting to come down from the northern part of the Arctic Ocean. And then here's a little more detail. Spitsbergen is the big island. Longyearbyen is the capital. There's only about 2,300 people that live in Svalbard year-round. Almost all of them live in Longyearbyen, the main town in Svalbard. And as a Arctic ecosystem, it's really quite unique because it lies in between the Greenland Sea to the west and the Barents Sea to the east. And it receives an awful lot of warmer temperate weather conditions from the northern end of the North Atlantic Drift, or what we call the Gulf Stream current, which is a warm, moderate ocean current that has a big effect throughout Northern Europe, here in Svalbard, along the coast of Eastern Greenland, as well as coast of Norway, Great Britain, Ireland, and the like. So Svalbard, not an easy word to pronounce regularly. Svalbard ranges from 74 degrees north latitude, where the southernmost island, Bjørnøya, or Bear Island, is down off the eastern southwestern tip, and then up to 81 degrees north latitude. So it covers a fairly good range in the Arctic ecosystem. So in Svalbard, like I mentioned, we will find polar bears. In fact, it's called the land of the ice bears for that reason. And I'll talk to you a little bit later about polar bears and their life there. What I really wanted to address today as a topic was some of the adaptations and the ecology of the animals that call Svalbard home. We have polar bears, of course, and literally millions of seabirds nest in the areas around Svalbard on the archipelago itself, taking advantage of that rich, abundant, productive ocean waters around Svalbard. Like these Brunix guillemots here, packed in by the thousands, nesting along the cliffs in certain areas in Svalbard. The landscapes, walking around in Svalbard on shore, it's really a stunning place. Not much can live this high up in the Arctic, this far north. A surprisingly low diversity of terrestrial plants call the Arctic home, but what can survive there does really, really well. It has some of the most stark and serene landscapes of anywhere on the planet, but upon close inspection, you can see some really sort of elegant, rugged beauty there as well. And as I mentioned, it is like visiting another planet. Some of the landforms that are there and these ancient sea rocks, seabed sediments that have been lifted up form a really striking contrast to what we're used to in our normal day-to-day encounters. So I will also be talking a little bit about the Arctic fox, which are a relatively abundant species in Svalbard. There is an endemic species of reindeer or caribou that lives in Svalbard, the Svalbard reindeer. I won't be addressing them specifically, don't have that much time today. And then, of course, other iconic Arctic animals that call Svalbard home, the walrus, for instance, which also merits a lengthy discussion, but today we won't have time to address too much other than they're a large marine mammal and they spend their time foraging off the shallows, primarily looking for clams as their main food source. Thousands of whales will find their home in the Arctic Ocean and the Arctic ecosystems for the northern summer. Whales like humpback whales migrate to the waters around Svalbard and other parts of the Arctic to forage on the incredibly abundant marine life that is produced there during the summer months. Also, species like minke whales as well will find their way up into the Arctic ecosystems to do the same. Both of these species, humpback whales and minke whales, are what we call baleen whales, or they're filter feeders, and they're feeding on the smallest little invertebrate life that we find up in the Arctic Ocean. Other species, such as this bearded seal and many other species of seals, or pinnipeds we call them, find the Arctic a very comfortable environment to live in, primarily because they have several inches of very thick blubber, keeping them warm in these extremely cold conditions. And animals like seals, like these bearded seals, are non-migratory primarily. They stay in the Arctic on the sea ice throughout their entire life history, really quite remarkable creatures in their own right. How do we see Svalbard? Well, as I mentioned earlier, I work for a company, Lindblad Expeditions, and we have a few vessels that travel throughout the Antarctic and the Arctic. And this is one of them here, one I've been very proud to work on for many years, the National Geographic Explorer. And a little closer look at her. She's a remarkable expedition ship. So we sail to these remote destinations like Svalbard, and then we set out using small zodiacs, like you can see here in the ice-strewn waters of Svalbard, exploring the sea ice and what critters may be around. We also are fortunate enough to be able to go on land and explore. Now, when we're on land in Svalbard, we have to be very careful because there's polar bears there. And so each one of our field staff are trained to use firearms, rifles, as a protective measure should a polar bear become aggressive or get too close. We've never had to discharge a rifle at a polar bear directly. We also carry flare pistols, but this is one of our naturalists and a dear friend, Stefan Lundgren, heading out to go scout the area before we land guests on shore, looking for polar bears. Once we are ashore, we do practice social distancing. No, just kidding. We stay in pretty tight groups when we're walking on shore, again, because of polar bear safety. But I love this photograph because of the scale that it presents to how small our human figures are against this very vast landscape. Now, we're visiting Svalbard in the summer. This might look like winter to you because of all the snow, but this is sort of midsummer in the Arctic, and much of the snow and ice still has not melted yet. And in fact, where this photograph was taken, it's one of the drier places in Svalbard. It's what we call the high polar desert. And sometimes we're fortunate enough to encounter animals like reindeer up close and personal. Okay, moving on, as we're making our explorations on shore in Svalbard, this is one of my favorite places in the whole archipelago to go to, and I'm going to show you some video footage from here shortly. But this is a place called Diskobukta, or Disco Bay. And at Diskobukta, there is this incised canyon into the sedimentary rock, and in it are tens of thousands of nesting kittiwakes. And we'll see what that looks like here shortly. So I had mentioned that the waters around Svalbard are quite productive, so much so that literally millions of seabirds, these are birds that make their living out of the ocean, find their way to Svalbard and nest there every year. And the ability to do that it's only possible because the waters nearby and around Svalbard are productive enough that they can find enough food to do that. And one time visiting one of these bird colonies, one of our guests just exclaimed, "There's more birds than air." And I've always thought that was a wonderful thing. As a bird person, that's always a good thing. Birds like black-legged kittiwakes, somewhere in the order of 300,000 pairs of these birds nest there in the summertime. Here is that Diskobukta, that kittiwake colony. And I think I have a little clip in here to show just what that might look and sound like. So here we go. So kittiwakes are a type of gull. And again, it's the most abundant gull species in Svalbard, and by the tens of thousands of them nest in these colonies, very, very densely packed. Another nesting seabird that's quite common and a one that we like to feature while we're there is the Brunix guillemot, or also called the thick-billed murre if you're North American based. And give you an idea of what that type of colony, here there's over 70,000 breeding pairs of Brunix guillemots at this one colony, Elkefilet. And this is constant, all day long, coming and going from this colony is a constant stream of birds. There are several other species of birds that nest with these guys as well here, but the guillemot is by far the most abundant bird. Somewhere in the order of almost 1 million pairs of Brunix guillemots call the Svalbard archipelago home for the summertime. Pretty impressive, huh? I'm not a videographer, I'm a photographer primarily, so my video clips are few and far between and probably not all that impressive, but it's good to at least see the movement. Here's what one of those cliffs might look like on close inspection. These birds lay one single egg on the rock cliffs, and it's really quite remarkable how well they manage raising that one egg. No nest, it just sits on top of the ledge, and the parents alternate turns taking care of that egg. Here's a look down on some Brunix guillemots down below. And lastly, the last seabird I'll talk about is the little auk, or we call them here in North America the dovekie. And they are the smallest of the elcid species up in Svalbard. Elcids are a group of birds that are related to puffins. Everyone knows what a puffin is. I'm not going to talk about puffins because people know too much about puffins. Let's talk about something else. Anyways, the little auk, or the dovekie, over 1 million pairs nest in Svalbard. It's probably the most abundant bird species found there, and they're really a remarkable critter. Just give you an idea how dense they can be. Look at this picture. It doesn't look like much is there. This is one very small segment of a huge breeding colony, and you can see up there's some dovekies there, little lost there, oh, some there. If you look closely, and I've missed several, those are all pairs of dovekies getting ready to start the breeding season. Okay, so Joe, that's it for the first segment.
All right, Doug, excellent. So what we're going to do, Doug's got a couple little segments. So we're going to take a little pause now and grab a few questions. So if you are on camera with us, you can virtually raise your hand. If you look, if you click participants, it opens a little panel at the side, and there should be a raise your hand option. I'll see a little blue hand next to your name, and I'll know to pick you. And as well, to those tuning in via YouTube, if you send in a question to the YouTube chat, I will watch for those as well and work in some of those questions. And let's get started with one here. Let's see. We got Bryson tuning in on YouTube. Wondering about, with it being so far north, how do you get some of the supplies up there?
Oh, well, that's a good question. Was it Bryson?
Yeah.
That's a good question, Bryson. On our ship that we're traveling on, we travel in and out of the town of Longyearbyen, and there's an airport there. And it's really quite fitting that we're doing this particular presentation now, because one of our new ship, the Endurance, is supposed to be launched here and in Svalbard currently, but with today's conditions with COVID-19, that's not happening. But we get our guests come in by airplane, and on that same airplane is all of our provisions come in for the ship. And so the ship will arrive in Svalbard from positioning from the southern part of the North Atlantic to Svalbard, fully stocked. And then throughout the summer while we're there, regular provisions come in. It's a good question though. It is very remote. And it's a costly type of thing to do, to bring food up there for people and put it on a ship to sail around, but we feel it's worth it to give people the experience and learn about such an incredible place.
All right, absolutely. So don't be shy. To those who are tuning in with us, go ahead and raise your hand virtually, or if you can't find the virtual button, give a wave at the camera. I'm watching a few of the cameras if you can't find the virtual one, and I can grab you that way. Let's take at least one more, and then we'll go, we'll jump back to the chat. There we go. We got one from Gabby. Gabby, go ahead and unmute your microphone for me.
How do you travel to get there?
Like from Michigan, or where did you travel from?
I missed the first part of that question, Gabby.
How do you travel to get there?
So, well, I live in Alaska, and if you're in Michigan.
No, Ontario.
Oh, okay, Ontario. Okay, that's close to Michigan. My mom's from Ontario. If you would go to Toronto, say the airport, and you would fly to Oslo, Norway. And then in Oslo, Norway, you would take another plane up to Longyearbyen, and that's where you would meet the ship. And when I go, I have got to go Alaska, Seattle, maybe Amsterdam, Oslo to Longyearbyen. It's a long ways away from almost anywhere unless you live in Norway. Svalbard is really, really far away.
All right. Doug, let's go to round two. I think round two might be the Arctic fox. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that sounds, I hope so. Let's go there. Thank you for the questions, guys. Let me, I thought it would stay paused where I left off. Okay. So I had mentioned wanting to talk about the adaptations. And if you don't know what adaptations are, or what that means, that's fine. That's what we're here to learn about. An adaptation is something we're all dealing with right now. We're all adapting to our new situation with the coronavirus and all that's going on. And animals and plants and in the natural world have adapted to live in their conditions that they live in. And so in general terms, the environment works on plants, on animals, and other facets of the natural world. And evolutionary processes take effect, and certain animals develop adaptations that are best suited for their environment. So this Arctic fox that you're looking at here, it looks like rather ungainly sort of looking creature at this stage in its life history. I think most people are familiar. These are the next few pictures are the only few that aren't mine. Now there we go. Oh wait, I forgot. I'm so new to this. I have a video that I'm going to narrate, which this should be interesting, that I put together about the Arctic fox, because there's some footage in there that I want to share with you guys. And so we'll go from there. So as I said, the Arctic fox, in the winter time, it has this all white pelage or coat that we call it. And that's an adaptation for survival in the Arctic in the wintertime. Part of one of their foraging strategies is Arctic fox will follow polar bears around in hopes to scavenge food from one of the kills that a polar bear is made. When we visit Svalbard in the summertime, this is how we see the Arctic fox. They're in their transition from their winter coat to their summer coat, which is sort of a brown, charcoaly brown. And this footage is from an event we witnessed last summer of a pair of Arctic foxes hunting geese. There are no rodents, wild rodents in Svalbard, so the fox there have evolved to forage primarily on birds, nesting birds, and there's lots of them. So here's some still footage of that fox taking goose eggs away from the nests. Now they don't just go around and pick them up. They have to seek out very carefully where these eggs are. They're constantly on the prowl. And of course, the geese don't want them to take their eggs, so they have to put up with the geese are defending against the fox. And so the fox has to choose its food wisely. And we watched this particular pair of foxes for about an hour, and they collected so many eggs from these geese that they started to stash the eggs in the tundra, which is the vegetation mat that forms in the Arctic, for later consumption. So while the getting is good, when there's lots of food out there, the fox will spend as many hours of the day foraging as it can. And here you can see this fox is doing just that. Of course, again, I'm not a videographer by trade, so this is a little rough. Now back to Disco Bukta, my favorite place in Svalbard, that kittiwake colony. Arctic foxes will den near these bird colonies. And here's an Arctic fox that's on the prowl. Listen to this noise. So that fox has to listen to that all day. In fact, the kittiwakes that it's hunting get their name because the call they make. It's what we call an onomatopoeic name, kittiwake, kittiwake. And like the fox hunting the geese eggs, this fox will roam around in search of not just eggs of these birds, but also catching adults off guard. Like this one here did not make it back to the nest. So in the course of a day, this fox may consume several birds to bring back to its den for its kits that are in the den, because they have babies to feed as well. It's really a thrill to be able to be in this environment and witness these things firsthand, and it's nice to bring a snippet of that to you guys today. Now, the Arctic fox, like this here, again, is in transition, and that coat that they have in the wintertime in the Arctic in general, it's one of the coldest climates on the planet. Svalbard is slightly milder because it's near the warm ocean waters of the North Atlantic, but these foxes have the thickest coat of almost any animal on the planet. It's one of the most insulative coats, that's for sure. And that'll help them survive through the winter. So one of the many adaptations that these animals have. The other one is persistence and uncanny ability to adapt to new situations. So if a new food source pops up, an Arctic fox is going to exploit it. So, okay, Joe, that's it for the Arctic fox. If anybody has any questions on that.
All right, perfect. Let's start off on YouTube. So let's see here. All right. So Annabelle's curious about, or sorry, this is Victoria. Victoria's curious about what other kinds of work or industries are in Svalbard.
Oh, that's a really good question. Apart from the tourism industry, which is ever growing everywhere really, but Svalbard has a very long history, starting back to the 17th century. It had been exploited for the whales that were there, the seals, the walrus were all hunted, polar bears were hunted, Arctic fox were trapped there extensively for over a couple centuries. All of these large animals were exploited there. And then in the 20th century, the extraction of coal in a few different places. Barentsburg, I believe, is still an active coal mining. It's a Russian community. But so currently, there's primarily tourism. Svalbard is almost exclusively, entirely protected by the Norwegian government because it's got so many unique ecological features. So currently, there's not a lot of other industries there besides people visiting, and then fishing. The fishing industry around the waters of Svalbard is also thriving. So from a resource perspective, it has lots to offer. And in the past, it was exploited almost to the point where we had driven to extinction the walrus there and the bowhead whale, as well as many other species of marine mammal, including the polar bear.
All right. So don't be shy. Use the hand raise option on the right if you do have a question. For now, we'll grab another one from YouTube. So let's see. Predators. What are some predators of the Arctic fox?
Oh, predators of the Arctic fox. Well, in Svalbard specifically, they have really no predators because it's an island system that's very isolated. There's no other large canines there like coyotes or wolves that they would have to compete with. Polar bears do not really prey ever on Arctic foxes. Probably their biggest competitor or predator would be themselves. Most Arctic fox don't live beyond 5 years old in this ecosystem because it's a very harsh place to live. Starvation is primarily their worst enemy, as you can imagine.
All right. Looks like we've got a question from Aaliyah in Ottawa. I'm going to turn your mic on for you. All right, Aaliyah, what you got?
How many Arctic foxes are there in Salzburg?
Okay, that's a good question. We don't know the exact number of the Arctic foxes, primarily because their populations are very dynamic. If the food is really good, their numbers go up. If the food is bad, their numbers go down. But there's roughly maybe a pair of Arctic foxes every 10 square kilometers, which, you being from Ottawa, Aaliyah, I know you know what a kilometer is, which is really great. And so there's about one pair of Arctic foxes per 10 square kilometers of habitat available to them. So we don't really know their numbers from a year-to-year basis because A, it's really hard to count them in such a remote place, and B, they fluctuate really dramatically from year to year. Good question.
All right, great question. So one thing I've done as well is I just shared this in the chat sidebar. I've opened a Slido room today. I want to see how well people are paying attention to Doug's talk today. So in a couple minutes, we're going to do a little quiz. So if you go to the Slido website and use the event code Doug, then you can come in and you can pick your name to join in the quiz. So everybody should take a moment and do that now. I'm going to share it in the chat for the groups that are with us online. Oops, I just sent it to one person. Let me put that to everyone. We want everyone to have that. Okay, so that's there for everyone as well. It's a simple website. Use the event code Doug Detroit. I don't know about that. I'm a Leafs fan, so that's hard to see. Very cool. Let's see. So that's up there, the code. Let's grab one more question, and then let's go back to round 3. So Charlotte and Grace are joining us in Ohio. I'm going to put them on the spot and turn their mic on and see if they have a question for us.
You guys have a question? What do you think?
No pressure. We can come back at the end.
No pressure. Just
We
hurry
want
up.
to know what the walrus, what they use their tusks for.
Oh, that's a good. I can answer that question. That's good. So walrus, the tusks. Both sexes have tusks. The male's tusks typically develop longer, more extensively. That's probably a function of selective purposes for breeding. So the bigger the tusk, the more awesome you are. Females also have tusks. They primarily are adornments. They use them for getting a purchase when they're hauling out on ice. Sometimes they can stick those tusks into the ice edge, like almost like a grappling hook, and haul themselves out that way. Walrus will invert if this is their actually. Babe, can you bring me that walrus skull? I have a walrus skull, a legal one, gotten from. It's a petrified one. But walrus tusks, they go down this way, and the animals. My lovely assistant Maureen is bringing me. So this is the top part of the cranium of a walrus, and this was long ago hunted, probably over 800 years ago in Alaska. Oh my God, it's really dusty. In fact, you can see the ivory was taken out of this and cleaved off a long time ago, but the tusks point straight down. And so the animals forage like this with their muzzle in the water like that, and they're sucking out clams out of the sediment. The tusks don't really afford them any benefit in that, other than maybe when they're turning their heads back and forth, they might stir up some more sediment, but they're primarily for the males, I think, for a sexual selection standpoint, and then they can use them to get hauled out onto ice. Good question.
All right, very cool. And Doug, we'll get you to jump back in for the next part of the presentation.
All right.
Quickly before you do, a couple people on YouTube were wondering if the Arctic fox is endangered.
The Arctic fox is not endangered throughout its range. It's doing quite well. As the conditions change in the Arctic, though, as things warm up, they might find more competition from their nearest kin, which is the red fox, maybe encroaching in their habitats, and other things are gonna change in their world. But for time being, they're not endangered. Okay, let's go back to this presentation. Oh, and we're right on where we need to be. Okay, hang on, everybody here. Okay, the finale. This is like everyone's like, okay, enough about the birds, Doug. Let's hear about polar bears. Okay, so polar bears. This is one that I'd be glad to talk about for hours and hours and hours and hours. We don't have that much time, but I think every kid, every person has the polar bear as sort of the icon of the Arctic, and also the symbol of the changing conditions climatically that our world is experiencing. I'm not going to address that in any great detail unless people ask questions about it, but I will just be talking a little bit about their life, and just to provide a little bit of insight and just some wonderment in today's current conditions, something for you guys to think about and dream about. So in Norwegian and in most Scandinavian, it's some permutation of isbjorn, or the ice bear is what they call the polar bear. Now, I don't typically do this, but I thought it would be good since we are in school. We have to have 1 or 2 slides with some text on it just to make it official. We talk about polar bears in the animal kingdom. Dimorphism, or a dimorphic animal, means there's 2 different looks that they can take. So the males are much bigger than the females in the polar bear world. That's not uncommon in many animals, where males achieve much larger size and weight. And you can see there, for all of you Americans, I just thought it'd be easiest to put it in pounds so we don't have to struggle with metrics. And then the females are significantly smaller, half or less the weight of the average male. They live about, say, males 15 years to 25 years for females, the long and short end of it. And it's this time of year, April and May, the females are beginning to breed. They've emerged out of their dens, probably early April, late March, where they den with their cubs. The males do not go through a denning process. They stay what we call sort of a waking hibernation, a walking hibernation throughout the wintertime when times are lean. But the females go into den. And I'm going to skip some of that stuff here. Just so you know, though, a polar bear cub, when it's born, it's just over a pound at birth. It's about this big, okay? And they'll stay in the den with their mothers for a long time, nursing on their really, really rich fat milk. And then when they come out of the den, they go from just over a pound to between 11 to 44 pounds at weight. That's pretty remarkable, a weight gain program, much like many of us may be experiencing during these times of social isolation. This is an image just showing you how do we know what polar bears do. Researchers can put collars, radio tracking collars on these polar bears, females, and this is showing the course of a couple different females' motions throughout the course of a year. Where it's really dark and black, that's right around the coast of Spitsbergen there. The denning sites are located in those areas. And then the females branch out as the summer months go, as the year goes on, hunting for food, making their way all the way to Franz Josef Land. Okay, so mentioning the females and their cubs. Typically, a female will give birth to 2 cubs in the den. They may have 3 cubs if she's in very good condition. And with these changing climatic situations, polar bear populations like Svalbard are really in jeopardy because the sea ice formation has altered so much that the mothers often can't get the cubs out onto the sea ice to hunt the seals when the food is the most abundant, so they can really struggle. But the females will keep their cubs for 2 years or a little longer. And every single facet of their life revolves around keeping those cubs safe and well fed. These bears, once they are able to make it onto the ice, can roam, tens and tens of miles a day, just looking for one food item, like a ringed seal or a bearded seal. Life is not easy for a female polar bear. And why I'm focusing on the female polar bears and their cubs a lot is because every polar bear cub has been trained by a female. The male polar bears have nothing to do with this part of their life history. So every single thing that a male polar bear learns in its first 2 years has come from its mother, which is really important. They are the key part of this species survival, is keeping productivity and females healthy and happy, and their cubs in habitat that they can find enough food in. Here's a female that's finishing up a seal that she dispatched, maybe hours before. They'll eat as much food as they can after making a kill. The cubs have already been satiated. They're full, and they're like, all right, we're good to go. We're kind of bored of this. Let's keep moving, Mom. They'll nurse their cubs for that full 2 to 2.5 years that they're with them. The nursing will fade as the cubs get older, but this is a fairly large cub. This is a 2-year-old cub, and it is nursing still from its mother, which is really quite remarkable. All right, we'll talk a little bit about life on the ice for these bears. It is a really incredible environment that polar bears call home. In fact, polar bears are classified as marine mammals, like seals, like whales. They are marine mammals. So much of their life history is dependent on the marine environment that they're classified as a marine mammal. And particularly male polar bears, rarely set out on land unless they absolutely have to. Female polar bears, of course, have to den on the land, and then they move away from land as the habitat permits them to. And it's not, I have a little video to show you. It's not great footage, but to show you a little bit about what this might look like for these bears out on the ice. This is in the middle of summer. It can still be very, very windy and very cold, as is exhibited here. This is the edge of what we call the fast ice, or the sea ice that's formed in a bay. And this is in midsummer, so the ice is breaking up. And you can see the polar bear right there. And this is all footage of the same bear that we watched for quite a while. This is a young male bear, and it's a little alarmingly thin for this time of year. This bear should actually be kind of fat, because the spring is one of the most productive times for him for hunting seals. But you can see the animal's shoulders and its pelvic girdle, its bones, sort of its hips are exposed. And so this is a young bear, probably still maybe learning to make his way on the ice, and not the most successful hunter so far in his career. But it's really nice to see their motion, how they move on the ice. Polar bears have adapted these massive, have adapted with massive feet. Their feet are gigantic, and that affords, they're like snowshoes when they're walking around on the snow and the ice. It also, they're incredible swimmers. They've been recorded swimming hundreds of miles offshore. And in the course of one day, a polar bear could certainly swim 10, 20 miles, no problem, to get from one patch of habitat to the next. And so here you can see those massive paws and claws too they use to grapple their prey, not to mention their giant teeth. But you can see this bear is quite skinny for this time of year. You can see the back part of the animal's body there, the pelvis or the hip bones are shown, and just indicative that he hasn't had a meal probably in a couple days. And there he goes off on his own, the harsh environment of the sea ice, looking for food. During the spring and the later summer months, the sea ice starts to deteriorate, and the bears find it quite difficult to walk around on the collapsing and deteriorating ice surface. And so again, those big paws come into play. And look at the claws on this guy's foot here. Much like I mentioned, those walrus tusks, they're used as grappling hooks to keep their purchase on the surface. There, another look at those beautiful feet. The other really fascinating adaptation polar bears have, of course, their white fur, right? They have all white fur. It's actually a translucent fur. Light passes through it quite easily. Their skin is all black, jet black, and the fur is all white. This allows sunlight to penetrate through the fur and provide a little insulation. The skin warms up a little bit during the summer months, but the fur itself is mostly waterproof. The animals, again, do quite well in the water, and it's one of their remarkable features. That all white coat, like the Arctic fox, has evolved so that they're stealthy when they're hunting on the all white world they live in. There's a couple more shots looking at these animals in the wild. Polar bears are by nature relatively solitary. When they do come in contact with another polar bear, it can be quite confrontational. Male polar bears can get quite aggressive with one another. And male polar bears will hunt and kill cubs, young polar bears, because it's a food source that's available to them. And so it's not an easy life being a polar bear. And that's why the female with their cubs is so important, because she has to make every decision based on those cubs' safety. And one of the primary ones is to avoid male polar bears, because it almost is a guarantee that that male bear will try to kill their cubs. They have an unbelievable sense of smell. They can smell, the scent of a seal or a walrus or a kill or something to scavenge, miles and miles away as it travels over the ocean and over the sea ice. So they use that smell. It's better than their vision, that's for sure. Here's a polar bear doing what we call spy hopping, looking to see if there's any seals on the ice. In fact, while they're hunting seals, one of their strategies is from a distance, they'll do that and they'll try to get the best approach to find a seal that they may be able to take. And this is one of their preferred food items, the little ring seal. It's the smallest pinniped up in this part of the Arctic, and is the most abundant, and it's the most viable and rich, rewarding food source for these polar bears to hunt. And the other one that they prefer is also the bearded seal, a much larger seal. Here's a strategy that polar bears use quite often. The seal species that I mentioned, the ring seal in particular, they have what's called breathing holes. They carve a hole out in the ice. The polar bears or the seals use that to breathe, and they go down and forage, and it keeps them safe. But they have to come out of those breathing holes. And here's a polar bear doing what we call still hunting, which is my kind of hunting all the way. Just sitting there and waiting, sometimes for hours on end, in hopes that that seal's going to pop its head out of that hole and the polar bear can grab it. It's one of their main hunting techniques in this part of the world. This was a really interesting experience to have witness or see, at least, this polar bear here feeding on the remains of a beluga whale that it may have captured and killed itself along the ice edge of this glacier, which is where beluga whales spend a lot of time. And here it had hauled this whale up on the ice and was feeding on it quite contently as we observed it. Once they make a kill and they've had their fill for the time being, a common thing they do is they bury their food under, in some cases, several feet of snow and ice to prevent the smell from wafting any further away than it normally would, to draw in other polar bears, which they don't want to share their food. And then once they're content with that, they can just have a lie down on their food and wait till their belly tells them it's time to eat again. And I like this image because this is showing an animal that's pretty comfortable in its environment. Here is a male polar bear sleeping on broken, jumbled sea ice. And I just think it's a very serene thing to think about, how an animal can live in such a harsh, wild place, but yet be so well suited to do so, where any one of us thrust into this environment without lots of gear and all sorts of food preparations, we wouldn't make it more than a couple days. So sort of in closing here, polar bears and the other animals that call Svalbard home and the Arctic are really incredible animals and deserve all the protection and care and concern that we can afford. And like this female polar bear looking, testing the waters for her and her cub ahead, that's what we have to do as a species here, is we are the only ones that can help these animals by changing our behavior and protecting them for generations to come. Svalbard is an incredibly beautiful place. It's very distant and remote. And I hope that today you've learned a little bit of something about it and maybe had some interest placed upon you to maybe study biology or learn more about Arctic ecosystems in general. Whereas this polar bear looking up at us, asking us, when are we going to be able to leave our homes? So with that note, I will say thank you, everybody. And let's hope that in the future, we don't just have polar bear tracks to look at. So I hope you enjoyed that. And any questions, be glad to take.
All right, Doug, that was awesome. So let's get our groups jumping in that Slido quiz right away. So I already see everybody signed in for it. So if you jump to your Slido window, I'm going to start it right now. You've got 20 seconds for each question, and then we'll grab a couple questions to wrap up today. So let's start the quiz, see how well we were paying attention. First one here, about how many people live in Dougstown in Alaska? Was it about 500, about 1,000, 10,000, or 7? Is it that small? It's just 7. Let's see, we got a couple more seconds on the clock. All right, Doug, looks like people were paying attention so far. 60% went with about 1,000. Good start. Let's slide on to our next question. What is an archipelago? So is it a group of islands, a group of polar bears? Is it a town in Svalbard, or was it Doug's favorite food? Let's see what happens here. All right, we've got a couple more seconds. All right, 80% went with a group of islands. Good job. Nobody thought it was Doug's favorite food.
Oh yeah, good for you guys. Thanks.
Let's see. What's the main food source of the walrus? Was it McDonald's takeout? Was it plankton? Was it crabs? Or was it clams? Who was paying attention? All right, we've got about 10 more seconds. All right, 82% went with clams. Good job. Nobody went McDonald's takeout. Why do the Arctic fox follow polar bears? Is it for protection? Is it to scavenge a meal? Are they hunting the polar bear, or do they just like the company? A few more seconds. All right, 100% went with to scavenge a meal. Good job. And I think we have one more question about our friend the Arctic fox. What is not an adaptation of the Arctic fox? Is it changing their fur with the seasons? Is it storing food? Is it adapting to available food sources? Or is it hibernating in the winter? Which one did we not talk about today?
It's a good one, Joe.
5 more seconds.
Pressure's on.
All right, good job. 81% said that the hibernating in the winter was definitely not an adaptation that we talked about today. And going to the finale board, Cecilia, 5 out of 5, 42 seconds. Victoria, 5 out of 5 in 57 seconds. And 24, Artem, 5 out of 5 in a minute. Good job, everybody, and thanks for playing with us. Let's grab a couple questions here. Let's go, where haven't we been yet? Lauren in Arizona, I'm gonna put you on the spot. You got a question for us, Lauren?
How thick is the ice?
How thick is the ice?
Oh, how thick is the ice? That's a good question, Lauren. The sea ice that forms in Svalbard around the archipelago is primarily what we call first year sea ice. That means it's formed that winter and it'll melt and then it'll form again the next winter. And first year sea ice roughly is between 1 meter to 1.5 meters. I'm going to let you sort out what that is in feet and inches, but about 1.5 meters would be first year sea ice. The sea ice that comes down from the northern Arctic Ocean that comes raining down, unfortunately, under our changing climate conditions, that sea ice is what we call multi-year sea ice, and there's never been so little multi-year sea ice in the Arctic and the Antarctic as there is today. It's to about 15% of the remaining multi-year sea ice, which is why our climate is changing so quickly in the northern hemisphere, because much of the Arctic is now open ocean where it would have been sea ice.
All right, we need to go now. Where are they hiding? There we go. Lucy in Michigan. You got a question for us, Lucy?
No question? No questions?
Just saying.
Hi, Lucy.
That's good too. Gabby in Hamilton, do you want one more question? Go ahead and turn your mic on for me. Actually, I can do it for you. There we go.
What made you want to be a polar bear Arctic scientist?
Well, Gabby, I'm not a polar bear scientist. I did study northern ecosystems, is one of the things I studied in college. And the Arctic as a whole, the ecosystem to me is just unbelievable. My wife and I live very close to the Arctic. We love being in the cold, and in life here in the north is just awesome.
Thanks.
But to me, the extremes that you can find in both the Arctic and the Antarctic, and how animals and plants have adapted to those places is absolutely fascinating, as is the rest of the natural world. So I consider myself a generalist.
All right, very cool. Well, I want to start off with a huge shout out to everybody who joined us on YouTube today. Thank you for the awesome questions. A huge shout out to everybody on camera today. Thanks for hanging out with us. And then Doug, thank you for that. That was an awesome presentation. Dove into so many different parts of Svalbard, including the wildlife, which, I mean, who doesn't love Arctic foxes and polar bears and walrus? So that was so great, Doug. And we're excited to host you again. We're going to steal you again and you're going to take us somewhere else in the world. I don't know where yet, but it's going to be fun.
Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Joe. You guys have no idea what this man who's in this part of my screen right here is juggling on any given day. So thank you for this opportunity, Joe.
All right. Thank you so much, Doug. Anybody who's tuning in and wants to stick around, I'm about to start an event with a cave diver from the UK. She's pretty awesome. If you jump onto the YouTube, or just stick around in this one, I might just reuse this call because it's open. we might just do that. So if anybody wants to stick in this call, anybody on YouTube, stay on YouTube and check out that event. Doug, again, a huge thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. And thanks for hanging out with us today.
Everybody take care.
All right. Thanks, everyone.